Okay, good morning, everyone. Are you guys all, you see my screen, Clay? I'll make sure I'm sharing this out.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. Okay, yes. Okay, so good morning, everyone. And yeah, thanks again for joining. My name is Meredith Wanner. I'm the creative director at Achieve. I work with nonprofits every day to help, generate support and donations to their causes, through design and building of their websites, that meet their organization's needs. I've been designing websites now for over 10 years, and I just have some practical experience I'm anxious to share out today, and you might even hear from my dog. So we'll see how that goes. But I use the internet like everyone else, and when I see websites that have some room for improvement, not total fixes, but at least some small things that can be implemented to help improve them. Sometimes I'm on a site, I'm like, man, I just wish they didn't have a picture of an empty, wall on their homepage. So, that's just what we want to talk about today. We just want to give you some, practical tips and tricks that you guys can implement on your own. This doesn't take place of a total redesign, but, it should be able to give you a jump start, on the, where we are with the fundraising season. So, let's get started. Website 911, how to rescue your website for fundraising success. Okay, so design matters. It might not matter to the person who's implementing it. It should, but it's certainly going to matter to the person using the design. And your website is a tool, so we want to make sure that we have everything in place where it should be. To help your visitors, navigate your site and ultimately become, supporters and donors of your cause. Without good design, we are confused and we don't know where to click. This is obviously a worst case scenario example here, but it's just kind of a visual, reminder of, when someone lands on your site, what are they looking at? Do they know where to go on the site? Do they know where to click? Do they know what the important information is? Because if we don't know where to click, we don't know where to donate. And that's what it's about. It's about, helping your visitors support your cause and learn more about your organization. Because there is still time for improvement. Like I said, this isn't in place of a total redesign. Just want to give you some tips and tricks that hopefully, we can make some improvements on your site today, so you've got a better site tomorrow. All right. So we're just going to talk about, there's a lot, of small improvements that can be made. We're just going to kind of look at 10 of the more common mistakes that we find on websites, and then what those quick fixes are. All right, so one of the biggest mistakes, and it's small improvements can have a huge effect in this area. It's just a lack of engagement. The reality is that web users are pretty impatient and they make some pretty quick snap judgments. This whole area above the fold, we call it, or the hero area, this is often the first visual element that a visitor encounters on your site, and it really is a place to show off the content that you want to highlight and really engage your users. This site, it does a pretty decent job of kind of laying out some of the information, but this is the home page. This is kind of a little bit of a ho-hum, and it's not super engaging. We want to make it impactful. So here's sort of a fix, and you can apply this to your site right now. I'm sure many of you do have a site where you have a hero section. That's a pretty common element on most home pages. And if you do have a section, I would definitely say, do a little self-audit, or better yet, maybe somebody outside of your organization. Have them take a look at this section of your homepage. Ask them, what do you think of the image? Is it engaging? Is it powerful? Does it connect with, the visitor? Does it connect with them when they're looking at it? Oftentimes, it's easy for us to kind of get, kind of buried in our own, what's important to us, but is it important to the user who's coming and visiting your site? This site does a really nice job of, they have a cute little puppy, it looks a little vulnerable, it elicits empathy on this page. They've done a nice job with, making sure that their text is very readable and clear. Their donate button is, contrasting off the back of the background. They've got some interactivity here. You can click back and forth through the two little puppies. And some of those things like the interactivity, that's not necessarily something that you can easily implement, but certainly, do you have the image in your hero section that is working for your website and really helping to tell the story? Because when your visitors come, they're going to make a pretty quick snap decision about your site. And this image is going to really is really like one of your most powerful tools in that, snap decision making that your visitors will be making. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the top portion of your website, and that's navigation. There's this kind of common, it's a common statement we use, don't make me think, don't make your users think. Using icons for navigation, if you are currently using that, that's not super common, but this is just a really good example of, it's too ambiguous. What am I clicking through here? We don't want people to have to spend a lot of time thinking. So, I mean, if you're using, icons such as like a hamburger menu or a search icon, those are fine. Those are standard and recognizable search icons, or recognizable icons. That's fine. But if you're using icons in place of words and there's no other title, that can be really confusing and make it difficult to navigate on your site, whether it's in the header or the footer or anywhere else. So just go through there and your site and make sure that you've got things properly labeled. This is another thing that you can take a look at. I know this is kind of common, like what we do, who we are, but if possible, we want to try to really make it very easy for your user when they first hit the site to get an idea of who your organization is. Okay, so we want to embrace predictability. Be descriptive and make it easy to understand. This isn't a great place to get super fancy or creative. Like if I'm using an example here. If you offer reading programs, label it reading programs versus, maybe internally you refer to it as, your learning opportunities. That's not as easily understandable to someone who isn't familiar with the inner workings of your organization. So we just want to use language that everyone's going to be able to understand and very quickly without having to think again. So, again, maybe this would be a good opportunity if you have somebody outside of your organization that's not as close, to ask them, look at our navigation. Does that make sense to you? Is it clear? Does it make sense, like what we as an organization offer and who we serve? Because there's, that's just an easy opportunity to improve the description about, your organization on your website. Navigation is going to be right on the top. We know that users look towards navigation to help communicate, what the website is about. Which brings us, what is the website about? Because don't make me think, but also don't make me read. Jacob Nielsen, he's with a group called Nielsen Norman Group. They are kind of like the gold standard of user experience, and whatever they say, we go with that. So we look towards them. They do a lot of user testing and help us understand how users use the internet and websites. So, he was asked, how do people read the web? They don't, okay? I know a lot of thought and care go into the copy, as it should on websites, and we want people to read that copy. But the reality is when users come to your site, they're going to be quickly analyzing that content to be sure if they're on a site that is meeting their needs and what they're looking for in terms of information. You know, they don't necessarily want to invest time reading paragraphs of texts if they don't know if it relates to what they're looking for. So this is just a case where, you know, in this example, if you have a lot of copy on your site like this, okay, without a lot of headings, you know, that's a big ask for your user to ask them essentially to go through and read all of the copy. You know, pull out, let's take a look at, you know, how we can break it out better maybe. Okay, so here is a fix. So we want to try to make your website scannable. This website, Invisible Children, does a really nice job of serving up, you know, who they are, who they serve, their challenge, and they have brief descriptions and then links to help funnel the user into the inner of the site, those interior pages, and that's more of an appropriate place to put more of your copy. Even there, I would definitely say if you can chunk up that copy and get some headlines, again, some scannable copy, that they, you know, the user can even decide if they, you know, at that next level, if they want to make that time investment and read. So look at your homepage right now, or like I said, better yet, have somebody else take a look at it. And you know, if they were new to the site and they scroll down, would they quickly understand what your website is about, what your organization is about? Because if they scan, you know, and they determine that it does align with the information that they're looking for, you know, they are going to stay. They are going to read through your important content and copy. But we just want to make it short and sweet, using images, icons, anything to help them visual cues. That is really going to make for a better conversion and more success with your visitors when they come. Okay, so this is a big one, and this comes up often when we're looking at redesigning a site. This is oftentimes one of the things that our clients will come to us and say, you know, they're like, right now it's just too cluttered, and you know, I think sometimes that comes from, you know, when sites, you know, way back when, like 3 years ago. I mean, the internet is, it doesn't age well. And there was, you know, kind of like a design trend, I guess, you know, at a certain time when it was like more is better. But, you know, we're not paying per pixel. We don't have to have every bit of content information all above the fold or on the homepage or, you know, whatever it might be. I know sometimes there are, you know, conflicting you know, departments within organizations, and we want to make sure everybody is well represented on the homepage, and that absolutely can be done. But you know, as you can see here, it's just overwhelming. You know, and again, we know through studies that, you know, people just don't want to engage in unattractive websites. So, what can you do though if you have a little bit of clutter on your website? You know, I think the first thing is to really, let's go over here. I think the first thing is to make a list of all the content that you need to reach your goal, okay? And that can be from different departments. You know, so maybe it's just doing, you know, an internal audit, asking yourself, is there anything on the page that we don't need? Oftentimes we find that there's content that, you know, it will come up in like discovery meetings and calls that, you know, they'll even, you know, clients will even ask themselves, like, why is that even here? Do we even offer that anymore? So, you know, really like look at the content that you have and, you know, determine if it needs to be there. If it doesn't need to be there, you know, get rid of it. A little extra white space isn't going to harm anything, for real. You don't have to like fill up all the space. And you don't have to add elements that don't need to be there. So, they've just, I wanted to just, point this out. They've done a nice job, even though they have, they have maybe an extra donate button here. That's a little bit confusing, but that might support something else. But, they've otherwise done a really nice job of using even different fonts, which that can be kind of tricky, but they've been able to incorporate that, I think, fairly nicely. And they've got organized content, calls to action, the hero image. I think that it's done a nice job, kind of letting, the user know that, they're here to help. So again, just take a look at your site, kind of audit the content, and just pull out what you don't need and try to prioritize. I want to just show you one other example. I'm going to go back here for a second. So this is a case study that an e-commerce store, online e-commerce store did. So this is their before. They had a theory that their header, the section here we call the header, was a little bit cluttered, and that they felt like if they could do some decluttering, they might improve their conversion, their click-through rate. And they did find that to actually be the case, by 45% increase in click-through and conversion. This is a really good example of, today what you could do with your header, and just very simple design little details that they changed out that just help to kind of, make it a little cleaner, a little more white space. Again, take a look at your header, take a look at the site, see if there's anything you can eliminate. Okay, this is one of my favorites, stock photos. So, I mean, we know that there's, a huge importance on imagery on your site. It communicates and conveys really the storytelling of your organization. Authentic photos, they they offer a level of transparency, and that helps to create trust between you and your audience. We've all seen them, and maybe some of us have them on our website, but they're the really stocky looking images that just don't look authentic. They don't connect to your organization, and they're just not doing a good job, telling the story. And I know oftentimes, stock images are really, where you need to go. If it's a matter of, you don't have high enough quality imagery to use on your site, or maybe you're just prohibited based on, what your organization does. Oftentimes with children, that can, for sure be, an issue, and then, you need to rely on stock images. So if that's the case, we have some tips and tricks for that too, on how to, choose good stock imagery. So here's kind of what I do, because I do a lot of image sourcing for our clients. So when I'm looking through stock imagery, I'm looking for natural light, candid shots, someone looking away, some imperfections, real people, the people that we serve and the people that, support our organizations. We want these to be appealing images, but we want to connect, and we don't, we want to show real people, because that's what, that's believable, and that's what people will trust. So we have some sources here that are free that you can use. So as an agency, we have a paid stock account that we use often, but I'll be honest with you, oftentimes I'm going to Pexels and Unsplash looking for images, because I just find that their images, they're not as, maybe like the catalog isn't as deep, but oftentimes I'm able to find some really nice images. They offer a lot of diversity, more of this kind of natural feel, than really sometimes like the paid, the paid agency version that we use. Now, what I do often do, I do this especially with the paid subscription that we have, and I'll do it with Pexels and Unsplash as well, because they've got some clunkers here too. But I'll put the word authentic or real in front of my search. So if I'm looking for a woman on a bike. I'll type in authentic woman on bike, real woman on bike. And sometimes it does yield better, options for me. And then I have a super, I do this other little trick I've shared with some of my other, designers as well, that I put the word hipster in front of my search. And I don't know why, but oftentimes it just gives me back really good images that aren't even necessarily hipster, I guess, related. But anyway, so yes, try the word hipster or real or authentic when you're looking through. But if you can kind of focus on natural lighting, again, candid shots, I think that's going to help give your site, if you do need to use stock photos, which a lot of organizations do, it'll just help give it a more authentic, real feel, and it just helps connect the user with your website and then hopefully with your organization. Technical problem there. Okay. So your website is slow. I mean, listen, your visitors just aren't going to hang around. And this is a hard one because, I know so many organizations, there's so much time and thought put into, websites. And, it's kind of ironic because some of the older sites will actually run a little faster. And this is oftentimes because, speaking of stock photos, we don't have photos on our sites, on some of the older sites. So they actually move a little faster. And it's really important that, we figure out determine why your site is moving so slowly. And there are a lot of reasons why, and a lot of technical reasons why that really, honestly, they're not DIY kind of fixes. But one fix that is a DIY that you can do right now would be to optimize your images. So we have a couple of free resources here again that we're going to share with you that will help you, first of all, determine maybe what is slowing down your site. And if you do determine that it is your images, we have a free service that you guys can use to optimize the images on your site. There are a lot of technical specifications you should be following. You don't want to use a high-res, large, 8x10, 300 DPI image on your site. It's going to slow it down. But even if you're using what would be considered a lighter image, like a 72 DPI PNG or JPEG, there are several different services, and I use Optimizilla to optimize our images. And it's just honestly as simple as uploading the file. It does all the work, and it shows you the original, shows you the quality of the original, the size of the original, and then it does whatever its magic is, and it spits out the optimized image. And you can see we've saved 75% on the size of this image. So that's huge when you're looking at how many images that you have on your site and potentially the size, especially those really big hero images can chew up a lot of bandwidth and really slow down your site. And then, once it's been optimized, you can even proof it and, take a look for yourself and see if it's the same quality, which I've had, my experience has been, it's always been great quality. And then you download it and re-upload it to your site. The one thing, little caveat I just want to say is make sure when you re-upload it, if you're manually putting it in, that's fine, but just make sure that the file name is the same, so you don't have any kind of broken images on your site. Okay, so here's another important factor on your site, and we've got a couple of fixes here, but just taking a look at low contrast on your website and how this might be impacting your visitors when they're coming to your website. This is a hard one actually for designers because, as designers, we're trained to, make choices based on aesthetics. But, the web it's really a utility. So we want to make it appealing and attractive so people want to interact with your website. but we also want to make it functional so that everyone can access your website equally. And one of the first measures for many of your visitors to make sure that they can do that is to have enough contrast. So the CDC says 26% of Americans, or 1 in 4 adults, have some kind of disability. And one of those is, low vision. There are other disabilities that need other special, whether it's development on your site or some other design requirements. But if we're just looking at some those struggling with contrast, that's something that we can do right away today to improve that on your site. Here are just some examples here of like a low contrast. And for some, this is going to be even more challenging than others. For some, some of your users, they won't even see the contrast. They won't even see words. For some, it'll just be difficult. And making your copy readable and legible for all your visitors, it's not just for those maybe struggling with low vision. It's good usability for all of us. It's just easier for us to read and take in information if there's a higher contrast. Okay, so how do we fix that? There's a free tool for that. So we're going to link this up for you. It's the Wave Evaluation tool. It's not the only one, but it's one that I use. And you can install that on your browser. And you essentially just, it's a little plugin, little extension, and you run it, and it's going to show you where there's low contrast on your site. So here's the Wave tool. It's kind of spitting out the low contrast on this site. And then you can see here, it has come back and says no contrast issues were detected. So if you do see low contrast on your site, there's a little tool down there for you to use, and you can just actually increase and see what that hex color needs to be. So that's just it's a free and it's an easy way to determine if you've got the proper contrast on your site. So here's kind of a no, and here's kind of a yes. And I know I use this example of the yellow button because I know a lot of us are using yellow buttons, and the white really does look aesthetically pleasing against the yellow. I like how it looks. It's also super hard to read, and for a lot of users, they just can't read it. They can't make out what that yellow and white. And here's just an example of the black and the yellow, and you can just see for whether you struggle with any kind of vision challenges or not. It's pretty clear. You don't need even a special tool to see this button is much more clear, better contrast than the white and the yellow. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's move along to donation forms, right? Important part of your site. What does your donation form look like? And is it just too much form? So long forms, the upshot is this. We know from user testing that when your user comes and they want to give you money and they look at a form and it's like a mental overload for them. It's literally, there's like fancy words we use in UX, perceived complexity and cognitive load. So this is like a cognitive overload. This is just mentally tasking. And just put it bluntly, it's just discouraging to fill out. So, take a look at your form and see, do you need to collect all of that information? If the purpose, determine what the purpose of your donation form is for. If it's for donations, you need to get some information. You want to be able to, connect with that donor, certainly. But if you're asking for too much information, are you perhaps discouraging donations? Okay, so our partners at QGive have shared some preview screenshots just as a way to help you kind of get an idea of maybe what you should be looking for in terms of donation forms, and a way to kind of fix those long forms and help with conversions. So what they've done is they have a multi-step form. Just kind of helps to like break out the task of donation into smaller tasks. And it reduces that perceived complexity, that cognitive load, and just gets them started right away. They start here, in this example, just picking them out and then move on. Okay, and I know, listen, this isn't anything kind of groundbreaking here, I'm gonna tell you. You know, everything is moving towards mobile. And that's especially so if you're trying to fill out a form. If you've ever yourself been on your phone and it's not optimized on the website just for taking in information, that's difficult enough. But when you're having to add information via a form on a site that's not mobile optimized, you know, we've done it like kind of like you pinch in, you try to like, you know, make it larger and then quick try to input your information. Usually, like if I come across that, I just bounce off of it. Maybe later on, hopefully, I might check back in on desktop. But if I don't have to, and I have somewhere else to visit, somewhere else to donate, somewhere else to buy, I'm probably going to just do that. You know, we're all kind of geared to just go the path of least resistance. Certainly, a donation form that's cumbersome to fill out, especially on mobile. You know, it's going to cause your potential donor to bounce out. And you know, this isn't something that, again, we know that these fixes, some of these, especially for donation forms, you know, are not as DIY, but we do have some. We do want to let you know that QGIve does have some free options. So that might be something, it's not necessarily that you can do today, but that, looking forward, if you have a free option that you can improve your donation form, that can help make a difference. Okay, so again, talking about images, of course, you'd want to use your optimized images, but, donation forms, this is a donation form on a site. There's no imagery, there's no appeal. It's really just, well, it's just a form. And so it doesn't, it doesn't drive any empathy, really any action. Again, it's a little lengthy, not as bad, but we can improve that. So by adding images, again, it just kind of goes full circle back to, the images on the other areas of your site. They drive empathy, they elicit trust, there's a transparency. This is what your donation goes towards. This is the difference that you're making, and it's right there baked into the donation form itself. So I'm going to talk a little bit about embedded forms versus a PayPal link. Some pluses and minuses. So, again, this embedded donation form, we're able to, pull all of our organization's branding, appeal. This is where, all of everything we've been talking about. Give your money because this is what the impact it's going to make, and this is who it's impacting, right? If you're only using a PayPal option, you lose all of that. You don't have your branding on there. Sometimes, people may not feel as comfortable if they're not as familiar with PayPal, sort of being thrown off to another site. So just something to keep in mind. An embedded form does give you more options. Okay, so to recap, less is more, make it clear, and tell your story. So ultimately, gain supporters and increase donations. Okay, so this is one thing I wanted to add in here because it's a question I'm asked all the time. Does button color matter? No, it doesn't. You guys, if you have really good contrast with your buttons, and some of the examples in these slides that we'll be sending out, again, it's there for you to see. There are different studies, but they're all conflicting, and ultimately we just know, just make sure that there's enough contrast between your button in the background, and then also make sure that that button, there's enough contrast between the label on the button and the button color. Okay, so a lot of tips and tricks I hope that you guys are going to be able to implement today, and whether you're looking down the road to do a redesign or you're not, you just know you need some tweaking, that's fine. If maybe you're kind of looking at it and thinking, okay, I'm going to do some tweaking now, but I think that we need to talk about, we don't have a responsive website, there's a lot of things missing, we just kind of need an overhaul. This might be a good time. Achieve and QGive are partnering up, and we've got some discounts that you can take advantage of. So you can check that out. We're going to send out the link. Then something that you might be able to take advantage of right now. Okay, so that concludes my portion of it. I hope that you guys are we're able to take away some tips and tricks, and we'll be sending this out. We've got links in there baked in for you, so you can just click through and grab those tools and get started.
Thank you so much, Meredith. We do have quite a few questions here, so let me get through a couple of them. And the first one is, here's a quick one, which is, where should someone put their social media links on their website? And it should be in a different place on mobile than it is on desktop.
I love that question. You guys, I had a slide that actually I was going to address that. I wish I had kept it in. So this is what studies are showing us, a couple of things. If you put them in your header, which I know a lot of you guys probably have them in your header, it's an invitation for your visitor to immediately leave your site and go down a Facebook rabbit hole. Users are now very accustomed to going to the footer to access contact information and social media, and it forces them to scroll through your site. So we recommend that they're in the footer, whether it's on mobile or desktop.
Okay, super. Another question is, do you have any sense of whether engagement with websites is declining as compared to social media interaction? Is one more important than the other?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I think they work as a partnership. I think that, sometimes depending on this, one example would be depending on the tools that your site has. I know a lot of, sites, organizations sometimes are relying on their social media for like their image galleries, just depending on what kind of functionality their site offers. But I think that, that one supports the other. So in terms of engagement, I think that, having, updated social media channels, whether those are updated regularly, as well as fresh content on your site. Oftentimes, you've got people visiting back and forth one to the other.
Okay, super. So it sounds like they're both really important.
Yeah.
Okay, so next up is, here's one that speaks to kind of the clutter issue you brought up. So oftentimes there's a lot going on. For example, register for a program, join a fundraiser, come to our event, come to our second event. How do you balance that when everyone thinks that everything should be on the home page?
Yes, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so I mean, I think, yeah, clutter, again, it's one of the bigger challenges. And if you have multiple events going on, just kind of like without looking at a specific site, I think it just goes back to creating that like visual hierarchy. There was that, we looked at the example of Invisible Children. That's a really impactful site, and they've just done a really nice job with, I think, the contrast in their copy, and making sure that it's just very scannable. So if you have a lot of clutter and information that and everybody wants it to be on the homepage, I think just making sure it's scannable, and definitely using white space, so that it's not, all, it's like, think of a room. If you've got a lot of furniture in the room, if you can remove any of the furniture, better, but if you can at least kind of pull it apart and maybe group it, chairs together and tables together, it just will help to kind of create a visual, better organization for a user.
Okay. So kind of a follow-up question that is, back in the day, there used to be a lot of emphasis on getting all the content that was important on your website above the fold, so you saw it when you first landed. Whereas today, web pages tend to be longer, or home pages tend to be longer. Is there a link that people need to worry about? Is it better to have it all crammed in the top, or, what's your feeling there?
Okay, yeah, so definitely mobile has changed the way users interact even with desktop sites, and they know to scroll on a desktop. I really like when I'm kind of sitting down with clients and looking at the redesign on their site, we really try to focus on making that above the quote unquote above the fold section very impactful, engaging. I think like one of the big trends right now is using video to kind of do that visual storytelling. It engages the users, and then they start to scroll. And one tool that we use for that scroll question is, first of all, I think it's again all about, is your site scannable? Is the information organized? Will it, will the user want to continue to scroll? That's really the most important. If you're really concerned about that too, we can always add like the little jump arrows on the bottom that takes them back up to the top of the page. Another option is if you have the functionality built in, depending on if you have what kind of theme your site is, you might be able to even switch over to the sticky header. You've seen those? It's like maybe they're a little larger, and then when you start to scroll, the menu navigation stays stuck to the top. So regardless of where you are on that page, you can navigate anywhere else on the site without having to scroll back up. So couple of things. Sticky headers work well. The jump on the bottom works well. As long as your content is organized well, scannable, I wouldn't worry too much about the length of the scroll.
Okay, that's great. So we did have a couple of questions specifically about mobile, and I know you didn't talk too much about it during the presentation, but do you have any tips on how to lay out a mobile site so that things like hero images look good on both desktop and mobile, or how to deal with it when your site looks good on desktop and not so good on mobile?
Yeah, so you're right.
Conversation.
Right. Yeah, and and one of the reasons I didn't touch too much on mobile is because it's a little more tricky from like a quick DIY sort of standpoint. A lot of sites, if you're looking at, okay, so today you're looking at your site on desktop and you're like, doesn't look too bad, and I like it, and then you go on mobile and you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? I think it just depends on the level of that website's administrator and there's kind of like skill level. There's everything from going into your theme and setting different, maybe your fonts for mobile breakpoints aren't optimized and they're just inheriting your desktop, and so they look off scale. Images can be really tricky, like when you're talking about that hero image, depending again on how your homepage, how your site is built. What we try to do, another reason, like when I'm choosing a hero image, if you can look for an image that, depending on how it's built, sometimes it might be doing this on your site where it sort of cuts off the ends of the photo, and you get like a weird, like, what is that? You can't tell what it is. It's like an arm or something like that. So try to find an image that's a little bit like where you've got the subject in the center, kind of focused, and enough background space so that if when it does come into mobile and it cuts off edges, you still see the subject. You still see that focal point. It doesn't be like some odd shoulder or something sticking in. So I guess, I would say the best that you could do, just like a real quick thing, is just make sure that your fonts are optimized. Try to choose images where you've got a centered focal point. Oftentimes, anything beyond that, it might be some redevelopment work that needs to be done, because if the site is just inheriting the desktop and just responding automatically, that might just be something that you have to kind of work around. So I would try looking at the fonts and the images first and trying those two tips.
Okay, that's great. And I think you said earlier that the kind of design principles have merged between desktop and mobile, right? That the user behavior now is to kind of scroll down the page. But I understand
Yes.
where you're coming from. I know mobile sometimes isn't really comes down to coding issues if your page doesn't break down well. And that might be a little bit out of the scope of this conversation. We'll have to bring people back for a web development webinar later.
Yeah.
So I think we have time for one more question, and we have, here's a good one. So are pop-ups a good idea, and can I use pop-ups on my site?
Yeah. Well, they certainly are being used. I think you have to ask yourself, what's on, what is the purpose of the pop-up, and when do you want it to appear on your site? I mean, from some usability studies, we know that if you land on a page and immediately there's a pop-up, that oftentimes that's not the content they're looking for. Your user is going to click out of that pop-up and just start looking for the content that they actually landed there to use. I mean, one thing that we do with our clients is we have an option where it's called a drawer, and it's like, instead of it overlaying on the center of the screen, it's actually like a little kind of like a little panel that comes up from the bottom, and it's sticky there until the user clicks out. But it allows the user to continue on with the content that they've come to the site for, but it still gives that opportunity to like pop something up, make them kind of alerted that this is something that we want them to pay attention to without obscuring their screen. And then sometimes, think of it this way, like your user, if they're interested in your site and that information is still kind of stuck there on the bottom, you may have a better response than kind of like, bam, landing on your site, pop-up goes over the screen, they've X'd out, now that you've lost that opportunity for that messaging. There are other issues that, again, it's a longer conversation, but on mobile especially, Google does some dinging on page ranking. On mobile, if you have a pop-up that obscures, I think like 30% or more of the screen. But anyway, again, that's a longer conversation. So I would just suggest, if you can, first of all, putting a little bit of time, a delay on your pop-up. And if you have the opportunity to have that pop-up in another part of the screen where it doesn't obscure the whole screen, I think that can be advantageous as well.
That's great. Yeah, speaking for myself, I can tell you, I also get a little annoyed when I see the same pop-up over and over and over again. So if there's a way to limit the number of times it's presented, that can be helpful. Or if it's dismissed, it doesn't come back up. So
absolutely.
Basically, all great advice. So, so I want to thank everyone for joining us today.